My tape recorder is officially going. This is Ella Surround reporting for James Cole. Today we are going to be talking about a kind of existential question, but it is, when is an ad no longer an ad? And so I think a really great place to actually kick us off is for you. I mean, I would love to know what you consider to be an effective advertisement.
Yeah, well, briefly, like, maybe even broader than that is like, what is an ad? And I think, Ella, you and I are roughly the same age, and like we grew up where an ad is sort of like, I don't know, I thought of an ad as like I was watching Saturday morning cartoons, and then like there's a commercial break where there's like 2 or 3 minutes of 30-second ads for a bunch of different cereals and what have you. And so those advertisements are a disruption from the regularly scheduled programming, the cartoon that I was watching. And you have to sit through the pain to get back to the content. And that's true on TV. Like, everyone's seen a TV ad in the middle of a game they're watching or a show that they like. And then it's true on radio. You know, you're listening to songs you love, and then there's a couple minutes of ads. It's true when you're reading an awesome website. You love reading ESPN.com, you know, to learn about what's happening in the sports world, and their banner ads that disrupt your experience. So an ad historically has been a disruption. It's how the content provider makes money. And so they take advantage of the fact that your eyeballs are on the content, and then they slide in a sales opportunity for a business to take advantage of the fact that you are watching. And I think the best kind of ads, to answer your question, are ads that are closer to content than they are to disruption. So what I mean by that is, like, an ad that, you know, an example I always give is, I don't know if you remember this, Ella, but maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a guy jumped out of a spaceship. He was in like the very, very high parts of our atmosphere, not quite in outer space, but basically. So he had to have all kinds of special stuff on. And he jumped out of a spaceship from like 100,000 feet or 200,000 feet or something like that, back down to Earth. And it was this awesome thing. It was put on by Red Bull. So it's a piece of content that, if you're interested in that sort of thing, like you like really action-packed videos, say, that might have been something that you opted into watching on YouTube or what have you, but it was brought to you by Red Bull. So it was an advertisement, but it was actually net positive. It was providing value to people that are interested in that sort of thing. So the best kinds of ads are ads, I think, that add value instead of just being disruptions from the thing that you were getting enjoyment from.
That's actually brings me to another question kind of stemming off of that. Because when I think of like that Red Bull moment, I would call it a stunt, which, you know, it, to those in the know, it's pretty clear that it is an ad, or it's, you know, it's getting Red Bull's name out to consumers. But to a lot of consumers, they don't recognize that as being an ad. They think an ad is either what, like, as you said, what plays during Saturday morning cartoons, what is printed in the newspapers, what is printed in magazines. And so, you know, I'm just curious your take on these different permutations of what an ad is and can be, and if that kind of, like, how the consumer kind of perceives it has an effect on its just effectiveness.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is like more and more ads are a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, you don't know that it's an ad, like you said. Like, if you ask people, was that Felix Baumgartner, the guy who jumped out of the spaceship, was that an ad? You know, maybe 8 out of 10 people that watched it, it's like, no, I was just watching something really badass and cool that I wanted to watch anyway. And the fact that it's brought to you by Red Bull and so on isn't. And there are lots and lots of examples of that, whether it's like a sponsorship of, you know, to stick with the extreme sports, because that's where my brain is, you know, the X Games, and they have like logos of all kinds of brands or whatever. Like, does that really detract from your experience? No. You know, influencer marketing is a great example of this, where like, if you are really into fitness and you follow a fitness influencer, and he or she recommends a protein powder or a, you know, stretchy band that you should use or what have you, and they really endorse it and believe in it, and it's helpful, that helps. You know, it's like, I don't know what protein powder to pick. There are about 4,000 of them out there. And if someone that I really admire is taking the protein powder and endorses it, is that an ad, or is that just like a helpful tip from someone I trust? Like, where is that line exactly? So what we're seeing is more and more ads are becoming helpful, additive things. Before this current iteration, to go back in time, Ella, you know, people watch the Super Bowl, and like, what did people say? Like, I watched the Super Bowl for the ads. Like, a lot of people say that. And the ads are like funny or compelling or interesting. And so you actually watch the ads as if they are content. I'm a student of advertising. And so there's certain ads that I love that just from time to time, I will just Google or YouTube and sit down and take a minute of my day and watch an ad. I would opt in, I would choose to watch an ad because it brings me joy, or I think it's really clever or interesting, right?
I'm curious, what are like one or two of those and why you just love them, why you think they're effective, why they resonated?
Sure. There's an ad called No Words. Part of why I love it is because it's a really effective advertisement. And part of why is because I know the guys who made it, and so I know the backstory. So basically, the NHL, National Hockey League, was the client, and two guys that I worked with very heavily in my early career made the ad, and they were sitting in the waiting room to go pitch to all the senior people at NHL, and they didn't really like their ideas, and they were kind of last minute rehearsing their pitch of like what they wanted to do for the campaign. And they came up with an idea like 5 minutes before they walked into the room, which was like, I bet when people win the Stanley Cup, which is what you win when you win, you know, the championship in hockey, the trophy, that they're just overcome with emotion. And here are these big, tough guys that are like broken down to tears, and like the whole season has come to this moment and so on. And I bet they're sort of at a loss for words. So they went in and on a lark just pitched this concept of finding historical footage of moments right after icons of ice hockey win the ultimate prize, the Stanley Cup, and just cannot speak. They're just at a loss for words. And so it's a 30-second commercial that just cuts between clips of all these guys with microphones being shoved in their face, and someone saying, you know, Ella, how does it feel to be, you know, champion of the world? You know, you just won the Stanley Cup. How are you feeling? And you're like, honestly, and the whole commercial is just that, like guys stammering and not really being able to, and then it just says, sometimes there are no words, and then it's just a picture of the Stanley Cup. And it just sends shivers up my spine every time. It's just a brilliant insight. It's really emotional. You get to see people just completely at one of the happiest moments of their life in these little snapshots. Beautiful. Another ad I love is my cousin's going to be a Navy SEAL. Hopefully he's going to BUDS, which is Navy SEAL training. And I've always loved this ad for the Navy SEALs. It's a camera pointed right at a beach at nighttime, like in the middle of the night, and you can see the waves coming in, and it's just lit by moonlight, and you can see some silver clouds in the sky, but the whole thing's sort of dark, and you can just sort of barely make out the waves coming in, and the clouds are moving, and then the clouds cover the moon, so the whole screen kind of goes dark, like you can't really make anything out for 5 seconds. And then when the clouds pass by again and the moon comes out, you see footprints coming up the beach from the water. And then the waves come in and wash away the footprints as if they were never there. And then it just says Navy SEALs. And that's the whole commercial. Just one shot. Amazing. I love an ad called The Great Leap. It's this beautiful scene where a man is trying to work up the courage to kiss a woman. And they keep cutting to him on the top of a sort of dystopian rooftop in like sort of a foggy, clouded cityscape. And he's like trying to work up the courage to run and jump off the building. So they keep cutting in between him leaping off of a building and leaping into a woman's arms. And it's just incredibly shot and really powerful. Lots of ads like that, you know. And then I guess maybe to, you know, campaigns that I think are really smart, Ella, that go beyond being a disruption. An example I would give, there's an agency called Droga 5 that creates some of the best campaigns, I think, of our generation. They're, I think, the best pound for pound advertisement agency in the world. They were approached by Bing about 15 years ago when Bing was trying to vie for the spotlight vis-a-vis Google and other search engines. Bing is Microsoft's search engine. And they were launching, or they had launched to very little success, Bing Maps, which is like Google Maps or Apple Maps, but Bing's version. And they couldn't get people to use it, particularly people that are our age, just like young people would just use Google or Apple. So they're like, how the hell are we going to do this? And they went to Droga, and Droga had a relationship with Jay-Z, who was releasing his autobiography. So they came up with this concept to, a month ahead of Jay-Z's release, they were going to publish the book all over the country. And so they took places of significance from the book, like the Delano pool in Miami, and they drained the pool and they printed one page at the bottom of the pool and then refilled it with water. And the Spotted Pig in New York, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it was one of Jay-Z's favorite spots. And they printed it one page on the plates. In the Marcy projects, they wrapped a Cadillac in one of the pages. They had a custom Gucci jacket made with one of the pages. So they had pages all over the place, all over the country in like 26 different states. And people could take pictures of the page in the world and pin it to a location on Bing Maps. And so if you were a huge Jay-Z fan, you could, basically it was like a scavenger hunt, and you could piece together the book that was all over the country, and people were working together using Bing as the holding mechanism. You know, another famous Droga campaign is Echo. It was a very, when you and I were young, was a very prominent skater brand, kind of skater punk, you know, 90s type shit. It has a rhinoceros as a logo, is very in vogue. And as they reached mass scale, they kind of lost some of their edge. They just weren't as cool anymore. And their core customers were starting to turn their back, and they were really struggling. So they hired Droga to help them get back to their roots. So Droga, instead of using fancy equipment, had a video guy with a small 90s camcorder. And they hired two guys to pretend like they were going to go and tag, which is something that, like, in the skater world and graffiti world, like you know, tag something with your sign or your symbol or your, you know, you spray paint or like put something up illegally. So the idea was to tag Air Force One, the president's plane. So on shaky camcorder footage, they had two guys like, yo, the security guards are gone. Like, go, 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 go. And like put a mat over the barbed wire, jump. They got a fake 747, which is what Air Force One is. And they put the presidential seal. So they faked this whole thing. And they leaked a video of two guys tagging the president's plane with Echo's logo. And then they leaked it to the press. And the White House freaked out, and they had to go and double check to make sure that Air Force One hadn't been tagged. And like everyone was talking about it. It got picked up everywhere. And they created all this earned media and this frenzy about how two guys could have possibly snuck past security and graffitied Air Force One, the most secure airplane in the world. How is that even possible? And it turns out it was just a stunt. You know, but it just like shit like that. That's just fucking awesome. It's clever. It's not just a boring disruption in our lives. It's something that's interesting, provocative,
exciting. And I could go on and on. There are, you know, hundreds of examples of effective advertising, but I think it's like not using the rote, okay, we need a print ad for page 54 of Vogue magazine. Let's sort of just do what we normally do. You know, that's what most of advertising is. And it's unpleasant for consumers because you're just trying to read Vogue and you don't really want the cologne leaflet to pop out. Like, you don't want that. And it's unpleasant for the people that work at the ad agencies that are doing the same damn ads every year. And the whole thing's very soulless. So advertisements that are additive, that are interesting, that are compelling to consumers and the people that make the ads, like, that's no more bad ads.
And I'm curious too, you know, given your experience and all of your time at agencies and now, you know, starting your own company and being on your own, how have you kind of seen the progression between these more traditional mediums and especially, you know, the rise of the internet and social media and all of the different social media, like Instagram didn't exist 10 years ago, really. And now it's ubiquitous.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the question, that we've talked about this a bit before, Ella, it's something I'm fascinated by, is it used to be that the institution would speak and people would listen. So like a news outlet would tell a story or report the news and readers would read it. And now news outlets can look at data of what people are responding to, and that informs what news they cover. So the news and how it's covered and how it's talked about is informed by the viewership. Same thing with editorials, same thing with ads. So what the internet has done is it's made it very clear what works and what doesn't. It's much more measurable. So it's not just a brand being like, brands of old, Ella, you know, Marlboro is a great example. Like, they told people what to think of them. They created a whole Marlboro man, you know, wearing his Wrangler jeans, like out and, you know, fixing a fence, smoking his Marlboros. Like, they created a whole ethos and a whole brand and, you know, lacquered over the fact that their product causes cancer and has all kinds of problems and so on. And advertising now is much more about like, what do consumers think of your product? What do they want to hear? And how can you tell them that? So it's not the brand coming up with the message and spreading it to consumers. It's consumers coming up with the message and through data conveying to the brand what they should be talking about. So increasingly brands are just a mirror that are telling consumers what they want to hear, not the other way around.
I think one of the most significant examples of ads within our very recent history is actually the Peloton ad. Because when it launched, it was derided and ridiculed, and it even spawned a different ad by Ryan Reynolds' gin company within a week that kind of spoofed that. And now, I don't think anybody could have predicted the ways in which basically everybody is buying for Peloton because they are all stuck at home. And so I'm curious, you know, this kind of trajectory of missing the mark, but then revamping from it and, you know, kind of like recalibrating from a bad ad or just kind of like a miscalculation of what the consumer wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan Reynolds is the thing to look at there, right? Like what he did, which was he joined a conversation, right? He participated, he heard what consumers were saying, he heard what the public was saying, and then he joined the conversation as a peer, as a consumer, as someone sort of riffing off of the distasteful ad. I think Peloton is the loser insofar as they lost because even though they're a new, sexy, trendy company, I'm sure they have a very large, fancy agency that's been around forever. And they made ads the old way, which is they decided what they wanted to say and they spent a couple $1 million making that ad and pushing it out. And it wasn't from consumer to business, it was from business to consumers, and they misread the room and guessed wrong as to what consumers wanted to hear, and they got slapped pretty hard for it. So I think you'll see that less and less of brands sort of being like, here's the story we want to tell. It will be much more, what do consumers want to hear and how can we very carefully tell that story to them? And by the way, Ella, brands used to tell one story to everyone because the media buy was much less targeted. So like maybe you know that Lifetime channel is watched mostly by women and Spike TV is watched mostly by men, but that's about as good as you can get in terms of targeting. And there will still be a man sitting there on the couch watching a tampon ad being like, this isn't relevant to me. But with Facebook ads, that doesn't happen. Like, I don't get tampon ads ever. Why would I? Right? Whereas, so I get ads that are very, very tailor-made for me. And so brands can tell different stories to different people. So in fact, like a cold brew company, Ella, might sell very differently to you than they would to me by nature of the fact that we're different people. And so modern advertising vessels, the modern media landscape, the data that we have on consumers, who they are, what they like, enables brands to tell stories with 1,000 heads or 1,000,000 heads that are very catered to the end customer, as opposed to just broad spectrum ads where you sort of hope that by and large you appeal to most people that watch it.
But on that point too, especially like somebody who's just getting started with their company might feel a lot of pressure to kind of create a multitude of ads to get as many of these different customers. You and I have talked about that before, especially with regard to your 8-hour experience of running different ads to different, demographics of people. And so I'm just curious if that hyper-targetization, like what is kind of that inflection point of what is worth your extra spend or like your extra effort there? And how do you kind of just go about deciding what is, worth the return?
The answer is what you just said, which is return. Like until you have an ad that's profitable, that's returning money, like then you know that you've hit something. And like product market fit too, like, and that's defined in a lot of different ways, but do you have customers returning again and again and again and again? So if I sold the cold brew I was just talking about to an artist in Brooklyn, and the nature of the ad was like, artists like to stay up late into the night sometimes working on their art, or you want to catch morning light and paint at first light. So like make sure that you're awake when first light hits or whatever. And that's the nature of the ad. And what we find is that when we sell to people in that way, when we sell to artists in New York talking about first light, like you want to be up at dawn painting, that we sell really, really well. And those customers come back again and again and again and again. And there's a lot of lifetime value. We have product market fit. We found a market, which is artists in Brooklyn, that like our product market fit. And when that happens, then you double down on that narrative and that story. We're a product for artists to help them wake up early, right? But until you've tested a few things and hit pay dirt, like maybe you try to tell that story and you find that didn't work at all. And so then you don't advertise to artists in Brooklyn anymore. And instead you advertise to entrepreneurs in Portland or investment bankers in Manhattan or whatever. So you can try different messaging and you can try different target audiences, but when you start to find that people are really coming back and your messaging's really resonating, then and only then should you sort of double down and continue to spend money on that target audience or with that particular message.
I also want to circle back to your point about Aviation Gin joining the conversation in what felt like a very organic way. This year especially, we saw a lot of instances in which a lot of brands joined the conversation around the Black Lives Matter movement, and it kind of blew up in their faces because they hadn't been walking the walk with regards to diversity and equity. And so I think something else is that, a lot of brands do feel this pressure to chime in and add to the conversation, but then they end up not adding anything very substantive. So what is your advice there for like, just how to kind of gauge, like, is this really a conversation you have, not even that you should be joining, but that you even just kind of have the ground in which to join?
Yeah. So I think, again, we're seeing this transformation from like, take Marlboro, where they created a whole narrative, like a whole beautiful, fluffy Marlboro man, cool, smoking cigarettes is cool, movie stars do it, whatever.
to like now where like everyone knows whether they smoke or not that smoking causes cancer. So there 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you could tell whatever story you wanted, and the brand and the ad agency were in control of the narrative because the individual had no means of, there was no union. Like the consumers couldn't link arms. There were no forums. There were no, Yelps. There was no way to like give your feedback on a product or there was no Amazon reviews, right? There was no way for consumers to speak, and or Twitter or like whatever brought down Peloton when they had that ad about the woman like losing weight even though she was super skinny. Cancel culture and its many forms and its many channels exist now, and it didn't used to exist. So brands used to be able to talk out their ass and tell stories that they had no right to tell. Now brands are called on their bullshit. So if you're telling a story about how cool it is to smoke, people are going to be like, yo, smoking kills people. Or if you're talking about Black Lives Matter and you haven't walked the walk, as you said, you're going to get called on that. And so I think brands need to be really careful about not acting like brands, not like appropriating conversations, not trying to tell stories that don't align to how they have existed as a brand, but to live more systemically. Whatever it is that their brand messaging is that they're pushing out, that needs to be something that has been consistent in how they've conducted themselves with their employees, with their customers, with their products historically. So there's a lot of pressure on brands nowadays to walk the walk, because if they don't, a light's going to be shown on that lie.
How do you think that kind of impacts the ads that they're making? Do you think it's for the better? Or do you think it's going to make things harder? Is making things harder for the better? Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think the days of having an ad that's like very aspirational and creating an allure or a version of the brand that doesn't actually exist. These like brand anthem 30-second spot on TV, like they exist less and less and less, and more of the spend is going into very directly targeting people with very specific messaging that the brand can make good on, a promise the brand can make good on, and a promise that very directly appeals to who's viewing the ad. So as opposed to like a broad spectrum, like smoking is cool, instead of showing that to a bunch of people, some of whom are heavy smokers, some of whom have never smoked, like a TV ad is a very loose way to target people, because inevitably 30 or 40% of the people viewing don't like cereal or don't use tampons or don't want to smoke. Like a billboard is the same. Like half the people driving by, it's like completely irrelevant to them. So it's a very inefficient way to target people, right? Same thing with a magazine ad. Like you're targeting insofar as the demographics of the people that pick up Vogue, and that it probably skews female as opposed to male. But men read Vogue. And so 30% of them, the ads will not be relevant when there's a female perfume. But when you use Facebook ads or you use ad methodologies that are much more targeted, and I don't just know that someone is a man, or I don't just know that someone is roughly 30 to 50 years old. I know that it's a man who's this age and this geography, that has this interest and does this online and so on. I can really target my message very, very tightly. So it really changes the nature of what an ad is, which is sort of the crux of our conversation today. Ads will feel less and less like disruptions. Why? Because as opposed to 60 or 70 or 80% of the ads you see being completely irrelevant to you or feeling obtrusive, ads increasingly will become, and fast, like Ella, I think in the next 5 years, like it's already sort of the case that like things you see in your Facebook feed as an ad or in your Instagram feed or on banner ads or whatever are helpful. There are things you're like, oh, I actually do kind of like that dress, or I have been meaning to go to Japan, and that cheap plane ticket is actually sort of interesting to me, or that restaurant in New York, I do love sushi, or whatever. Right? Like these ads will be helpful insofar as they actually target a real need that you have. And so my question again that you're posing to me is like, when does an ad stop being an ad? Like when is it just helpful? If you wore contact lenses, Ella, and like you need a new prescription once every 6 months or something like that, and 5.5 months in, it's like, hey, here's an ad for new contacts. Like, that's just helpful. It's just a friendly reminder. It's like a calendar invite popping up. You know, if like you like certain kinds of you love a certain brand, Reformation, and when they come out with a new dress, it's advertised to you. You're like, oh, thank God. Like, it's helpful for me to know when they've come out with new stuff, because I do like buying from Reformation. So it's no longer a disruption that you're like, get out of here. Like, I have no interest in this. You're getting in the way of what I'm trying to do, which is look at content. Increasingly, ads can just be helpful things that are like a curated list of things that you actually want or need.
Well, that also brings us back to influencers, which I know you've written a number of thoughts on in the past, and kind of just like, is the boom of the influencer bubble, going to come to pass, or whenever that might be. And a lot of influencers, they're creating content for brands. Number one, I mean, obviously they're the traditional ones that are the sponsorships and the collaborations, and when the influencer is directly assigned by the brand to make content. But then also when influencers are just making content for their followers, whether it's like a Zara haul or something like that, is that an ad? And how can that kind of like, what should brands learn from those very—
So when influencer marketing started, it was that brands are powerful and have money and prestige in our society. And influencers were little baby things that made no money when it first started, right? And like, you could get paid $100 a post or $300 a post. And so the power dynamic was very much brand convinces someone with a following to endorse their product, even if they don't really like it that much, and they get paid for it. And what's happened is that the following of influencers have gotten smart to this. And just like a TV ad where you look away when the ads come on, when you see an influencer endorsing a product, you look away now. In the very beginning of influencer marketing, people were like, oh my gosh, Ella is so cool. Like, she thinks this dress is cool. I should probably get it. And then they realized that you were just getting paid, and they stopped trusting you. So the only way influencer marketing works is if the brand of the influencer actually supersedes the brand of the brand. So if if a woman were a fashionista, say, and she has 100,000 followers, and her followers look to her for fashion advice, if the influencer's brand is more important than the brand's brand, and the influencer only works with brands that she actually wants to endorse, then her page still is endorsements of products that she has curated. So as the internet has become very large, Ella, it went from being a helpful tool to actually being overwhelming. The internet is too big. And so a curation layer is forming, sometimes using algorithms where we're shown news articles or ads or content of all kinds that Facebook or Instagram or Google or Amazon think that we'll find compelling. It narrows down the scope of the massiveness of the internet. And influencers are no exception to that. Like, they narrow it down. Again, if I wanted to buy protein powder, there are 4,000 to choose from. It's a lot easier if there's a curation layer, whether it's an algorithm on Amazon or whether it's an influencer I trust saying, this is the one, James. Like, you don't need to pay attention to the other 3,999. This is the one for you. So if influencers can hold their ground and be curation, be an editorial layer, and uphold their editorial integrity, then it works. But if they're just shills for brands, the minute they sell out and endorse something just to make a buck is the minute it completely falls apart.
I do want to circle back to this, because the idea of influencers' brand being more important than the brand's brand. Do you mean this in terms of just like sheer number of followers or like name recognition, or what, how, because sometimes consumers or followers don't really care about that, those numbers or those metrics that we see on the other end of things. So what can importance kind of mean, and what should brands, keep in mind in terms of that like personalization? I think we see this with micro influencers a lot too.
I think I just mean that the consumer, the would-be consumer, the would-be customer, the follower of the influencer, she needs to trust the influencer more than she trusts the end brand. So the influencer's brand is trusted more than the product that the influencer is talking about. So the influencer's endorsement carries more weight than the brand itself. Furthermore, if the influencer's brand is more valued than the brand's brand, the influencer has the negotiation power. So the influencer can charge more money. Like the brand would be so lucky as to work with the influencer. When influencer marketing really came of age, it was that the influencer should be so lucky as to get paid $500, and she would do anything and post for anyone to make that $500. But by doing that, she completely dilutes her brand, right? Like if influencers are just posting about a whole manner of products, that some of them are awesome and some of them are shit, they lose their editorial integrity and their followers don't trust them anymore. So they are no longer a viable ad unit. And that's been the story as long as time, Ella. Like most TV ads, people are looking at this screen, not the one on the wall. So the Jeep starts driving up the hill and their eyes go down to Twitter or their Facebook or their Instagram or their emails. So they're not even watching that anymore. The banner ads, most people don't even see them anymore. Like if you survey people, I've been in surveys about banner ads who are running for big Fortune 500s, and people didn't even know that they were shown a banner ad. The likelihood of someone clicking a banner ad and converting to a sale is lower than them getting in a plane crash the next time they board a plane. It's more likely they get in a plane crash the next time they board a plane than that they buy something from a banner ad.
That's pretty dark. But I do want to also circle back to this idea of brands providing just value to readers and like giving them a service or an information. Given my background, my mind immediately jumps to branded content, which we've been seeing that, you know, all of the big magazines are doing, and they have like a dedicated site, or they'll denote that something is branded content. But we're also seeing brands do it themselves when they're standing up blogs and, you know, creating editorial components and hiring editorial directors for their own brands. And so I'm curious too, you know, how do you kind of see this advent of brands kind of serving as the market, as basically the magazines and the storytellers in that respect? And what should people know about that process?
I don't think it's the most evolved version of the point. Branded content is a very, very old construct.
I mean, it's been around forever. Like, are you familiar with the Michelin Guide? Do you know what Michelin is? What is Michelin? Tires. Do you know this story? So it's the same company.
I do, but you can tell it.
So most people don't know this, but like, you know, if you live in New York or a big city or whatever, you've probably heard of the Michelin Guide for restaurants. It's like one of the preeminent, if you get a Michelin star or 2 or 3, you know, it's a big, big, big deal. It's a big accomplishment for the chef, and it brings a lot of business to the restaurant. So there's this guide of all the best restaurants and all the major cities around the world called the Michelin Guide. And it was published by a tire company, Michelin Tires, which is like the big sort of pillow looking man. That's their mascot. And so in like the early 1900s, when cars were first becoming ubiquitous in the 1920s, in Europe in particular, where Michelin, it's a French company, people weren't leaving Paris. So they were going to restaurants in Paris, but they didn't trust their cars enough, nor the infrastructure of like, you know, gas, or God forbid you pop a tire or something and you're 20 kilometers outside of the city. What do you do? So Michelin had a lot of that infrastructure in place and people weren't using it. Some of their best margins were around selling tires, auto mechanic shops, things like that. So they wanted to bring business into all of these things that they had all over France. So they started advertising restaurants all throughout France. in their guide, which is content. So they created helpful content. Hey guys, there's an amazing restaurant that's 20 kilometers outside of Paris. You should drive. And then what happens? Occasionally people pop their tire and they need to go and have it serviced, and Michelin's a trusted brand for that, and so on. So they used this guidebook to get people to leave the city and drive more, which caused more tires to pop and more auto work needing to be done on cars. And that's how Michelin grew their business in Europe in the early 1900s. So it's over 100 years old, this concept of content marketing. So brands creating helpful content that actually resonates with consumers and helps them, and is a bit of a Trojan horse to sell them more product, is a very time-honored tactic. But I think, yeah, like the trend we're seeing is like brands need to be more and more and more helpful. And ideally they are genuinely, authentically helpful. It isn't like an act, or they're just creating content as a Trojan horse. Again, how you truly act as a brand is increasingly revealed. Like bullshit is called on brands. Cancel culture will come to strike if you're talking about things or trying to own conversations that you do not have the right to own. So brands that really live their truth and then talk about it are the brands that will succeed going forward. So I don't know, does that answer the question?
I think so, but it also brings up another question too, because I do think Michelin is a great example of, and this by no means is going to be achievable for most brands, but it's got a starred guide. A lot of people don't know that difference. Like there has been a dovetail, or like I guess whatever the opposite of a singularity is, in that people do kind of treat them as two different entities. And you could argue that people will only go to the guide now and don't even own cars, especially in New York City. And so, you know, as you're kind of crafting all these marketing techniques, you know, what is, you know, and I guess maybe that was just kind of like a hallmark of the times, given the early 1900s and people getting used to the cars. But what should people keep in mind in, you know, keeping the ad extremely useful, but just like still on the side that the consumer still needs whichever the product is?
Yeah, again, I think it's like, which customers would really genuinely be helped by my product? Like if you don't have a good product, that's a problem. It didn't used to be as much of a problem because, again, you could bullshit a story. So it's a shitty product, amazing bullshit story, customers buy the bullshit story, and you can kind of get away with that. Now you can't, because people just know that you're not such a good product, because there are websites and Twitter and places that people can sort of talk about the fact they were disappointed, and your brand will ultimately become undone. So I think the goal should be, who can I genuinely help and how can I genuinely help them? And then how can I create things, whether it's product or content or what have you, that really helps those people? So you're not having to slalom out of your way. Like the Michelin story is a cool one, but like creating a restaurant guide, what the fuck does that have to do with tires? Hence the dovetail. And so like ideally, if you're helping people, the content you're creating or whatever you're putting out, the advertisements, like you're simply helping the people that would benefit from your product learn about your product. And in so doing, you are helping them, not hurting them. And if you're helping them, then I question, as per the title of this talk today, if you're helping them, not hurting them, is it an ad anymore? Like, to me, an ad is a disruption. An ad is a bad thing. An ad is an invasion of my personal space. If something is coming into my space and helping me, like Spotify, if you play a playlist, I think we've talked about this on this podcast before. Spotify, if you play a playlist and then you get to the end of it, it will keep playing music intuitively. Have we talked about this? Yeah. Is that an ad for like those bands? Like, are, you know, trying to get you to buy a record of theirs or go see a show? Or like, no, it's like, it's just trying to help you out and play more music that it thinks you might like because you ran out of music on your playlist that you designed. If you are about to run out of contacts and there's something that pops up somewhere that's like, hey, you're about to run out of contacts, buy more if you want. This is what you bought last time. Is that an ad, or is that just like helpful because you forgot that, oh my gosh, I actually only have a week left of contacts? You know, or whatever, like toothpaste, or it could be anything. Like when you're starting to run out, run low, when your favorite brand comes out with a new line of clothing, like, should you be made aware of those things? If it's helpful, is it an advertisement, or is it simply the brand just being like, I know that you like and use us, you might need more, I hope this helps. So the more that you're helping, whether it's through content or the product proper or through your advertisements, the less I think it's a disruption. And the more that you're helping in a direct way, the less there's this propensity for the dovetailing that you talked about, where like, yes, it always was a little odd that a tire company was making a restaurant review guide. And so that it makes sense that they became two distinct entities in people's minds. But if like the way that you're helping is very much in line with what your brand is, people see it as one linear narrative as opposed to a convoluted one. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, you know, as you're talking about brands being able to pop up and say, hey, you're running out of contacts, buy more. One thing that really jumps to me is the use of emails and newsletters and those kinds of things, which to most people go into their spam folders, but sometimes they don't. And so how do you kind of view the newsletter or these targeted emails, these marketing emails, which are essentially ads, but people just don't think of them that way? And how is that?
They do think of them that way, you know, and the data point that shows that is, you know, when email was first really popular in the 90s, there was a 96% open rate on emails from corporations. Now there's a 20% open rate on average. So if J. Crew sends out 100,000 emails, 20,000 people will even open the dang thing. 80,000 people will not. Like, just right out of the gate, let alone click a few things or buy. And so you might send it out to 100,000 people and only make 100 sales. It's very, you know, the attrition is pretty overwhelming. So the answer is the same. Is like, if you're sending a broad spectrum email to everyone, like if J. Crew sent one email blast to anyone that's ever given them an email address about some new linen dresses they have for springtime, any man that gets the email, most men that get the email, won't find it relevant. If I've never bought a pair of chinos in my life and I wear jeans and I get an email about 15% off chinos, yes, I'm a man and in theory might wear chinos, but I don't wear chinos. And so it's junk to me. It's just taking up space. And that junk, that overwhelm has led to people just not trusting that as a channel, which is why only 20% of those emails get opened now. Just like very few banner ads get looked at or very few TV ads get watched. People just have been conditioned that that ad unit, that 3 minutes of TV ads, this is called a skyscraper, this banner ad right here. This skyscraper is trying to sell me something. Like, they view it as an intrusion, and so they learn to block it out. And so if emails there's something called progressive profiling that some of my clients use, Ella, where they get to know their customers very, very, very intimately by asking them to take a survey. And then they only send them emails that hit their persona on the head. So they know gender, age, what they're interested in, why they like the product, and so on. So to go back to our coffee analogy, some people love us because of our caffeine. Some people love us because of the size of our can. Some people love us because of our price point. So if we have a discount, we'll send it to the price point people. If we have a new product with more caffeine, we send that email to the caffeine people, and we don't bother anyone else. So the more efficient the advertisement, again, if you're helping people, if it's information that they will find useful, then you can retrain people, whether it's through email or through a Facebook ad or through an influencer. Nothing's wrong with those media channels in and of themselves. What's wrong is that they've been used inefficiently. So an inefficient use of ads means a nuisance to some people. And a nuisance to some people means that people stop watching and paying attention to that type of ad. So media channels that are able to, in the coming years,
be hyper targeted means that they will not be viewed as ads, but instead as help. And if they're viewed as help, I would argue that they're no longer ads, even though it might generate a purchase.
And then my last question to you, and this is a little bit hypothetical, but do you ever see a point at which people will begin to trust ads again?
Yeah, it's the point I'm talking about. Like, I think, you know, the next generation, like our age's kids, let's say, you know, by the time they're 12 or something and they're on whatever, like this form function won't be the form function anymore. They'll be in their VR headset, or they'll be experiencing the internet in a way that isn't through this. It'll be much more connected to them. Like, this is already sort of an appendage. It's never more than a foot or two away from me, but it'll be even more of an appendage. And when they're viewing stuff through whatever they're viewing it through, there won't be this like divide of content and ad, stuff I want and stuff that's being forced on me. It'll all just be the same.
Is there anything else about this kind of like inflection point that we're seeing with regard to ads, and when ads not becoming ads, that you would want people to just keep in mind of?
It's just a scary, nothing to have people keep in mind, but like it's sort of dystopian. It's sort of like Minority Report. I just watched that movie for the first time like a year ago. And he, like, it's a futuristic society, and he walks into a store and they're like, welcome back, so-and-so. They like read something on his eye, or like his retina, they scan his retina or something. They're like, welcome back. Not last time you bought 8 like of this shirt. Would you like to like buy more? Like, it's on the 2nd floor to your left. And it's very, like, for some people, it's incredibly violating that the internet understands us more and more and more, and therefore can surface things to us better and better and better. Like, some people find that very violating, and then other people welcome that sort of bespoke fitting of the entirety of the world coming to their doorstep. And so just thinking about which camp you fall into, and just musing sort of with me as to, like, in a world where you can't distinguish between helpful content that is compelling to you and advertisements, those two things are actually just the same thing. And like, you're talking to your friends and brands and everyone in the same footing, and you're being sold things, but it's only things that you want or are helpful to you. That's the world that we're moving towards. And does that excite you or terrify you?
Which one does it inspire for you?
It excites me, but it asks a much deeper question about the difference between need and want. You know, like, there are things I could be shown right now that I want but don't need. And at some point, that distinction will become the new frontier. So being showed things that you want, it is interesting to you, but you don't need it. At some point, people will view being shown things that they want, like, you do really want it. It's not a disruption, but you don't really need it. That will be viewed as a intrusion. So really starting to ask the questions of, like, which I think we all are during COVID, of like, what is it that I really need to be happy, to be myself? Who am I exactly? Those really larger existential questions. The internet is trying to ask that about us right now. Like, the internet is asking itself, it's not a sentient being, but it will be one day. Who is James? What is James all about? And I'm asking myself the same question. So when I get shown an ad for something, whether or not I find that ad to be helpful or intrusive has a lot to do with how well I know myself. And if I do want to buy that thing that's a little too expensive, or that's a little statusy or whatever, or if actually I don't need that, I just need nature, good relationships. So I think it will really make us ask questions about consumerism and what is it that we actually need versus what actually brings us happiness and utility.
Got it. Well, that takes us to time. So thank you so much for your insight.